The way that I delivered the no was loving, connected, empathetic,
Mm-hmm.
respectful of her
Mm-hmm.
position within the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And she didn't go. But interestingly, now that she's an adult, she says to me, Mum, I'm so glad that you steered me in the direction that you did. I'm so glad for the no's, because
Oh,
she said,
wow.
I look at where they are now and I look at where I am now, and I wouldn't be where I am now on the path that I'm on had you not steered me in that direction. She said, I didn't always like you for it at the time, but she
Mm-hmm.
says, reflecting back, I'm so grateful that you did it. And that's been a really interesting perspective for me, having one that's nearly 20 and my youngest is 5. So
Wow.
that journey of these boundaries, the respect, the integrity, the values, ethics,
Yeah.
standards that you thread through everything.
Welcome to I Think I Can podcast. My name is Luella Young. I am a woman who believes that we, like wine, get better with age. Age brings us wisdom, intuition, and a level of sophistication that is beyond the reach of youth. I am here to tell you that living a luxuriously rich and fulfilling life is in your reach. I Think I Can podcast will teach you to think differently in order to get different results. Allow me to show you how to do life effortlessly. This podcast is for the woman who is tired of playing by the rules of society, community, religion, parents, and partners. I Think I Can is all about becoming brave, authentic, purposeful, and strong. Listen weekly, and you will find yourself living a life you could have only once dreamed of. Thoughts drive our physiology, so channel your thoughts with me into a life truly worth living. Enjoy the show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I Think I Can podcast. Today, I have the great pleasure of introducing you to Cathy Domoney, award-winning child empowerment author, transformational leader, and founder of Parenting Evolution. Now, I was quite excited about getting Cathy on here because with parenting becoming, I don't know, it just seems more and more difficult. I think it's really important to bring, more education and awareness surrounding parenting because, essentially, children are our future. So, so with that, Cathy, I welcome you with open arms.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm very passionate about this topic, so really wonderful to connect with you and your audience.
Yes. And so I always like to hear, where like the journey of you becoming, an author, a speaker, and providing the education that you do on parenting. Where did that all stem from?
So I've always had a natural affinity for children. So I'd be the person that was sat in the bank and the child would come up and start, climb onto my lap and so random.
Yes.
And okay, it's a child that this belongs to. And so I think children have always felt comfortable in my company. And I've always been able to connect very powerfully with children.
Yeah.
So that was like a natural affinity. And so that sort of organically took me into teaching. So I actually qualified as a teacher a long time ago. I won't say quite how long because it will reveal my age. But so I went into teaching, and I'm very, very passionate about who the children were, what their dreams were, what their inner genius was. And it wasn't always academic. Let me make that clear. And, all of the special qualities about them. And I became very dedicated and focused on connecting each child with their own inner brilliance, whatever that looks like. So I wasn't as passionate about the curriculum. So that's not a great teacher. So I loved to unpack even the children's fears, and we all spoke about it really honestly, and then we worked through it together, and we were a real beautiful team. And I loved all of that, but not so passionate about the curriculum. So I thought, okay, love working with kids, not so passionate about the paperwork, so I need to find something else. And then went on to have my own children. I had a bit of a breakdown when I had my first child, because I worked in a school where the leadership weren't very supportive of me, and therefore I got very stressed, and there was a lot of pressure and a lot of bullying in the workplace. And so I actually went to a point I couldn't drive past a school for 2 years because I was so traumatized by the whole event.
Wow.
And then that took me into a beautiful journey of sort of self-discovery through more training into counseling and hypnotherapy and coaching and all that sort of thing. And then I started having my own children. And the most beautiful gift that I've had that has advanced me professionally beyond the point I could ever have imagined going was having 5 children with neurodiversity. So, of course, all of my professional qualifications I hadn't realized was beautifully positioning me to be a mother to these amazing, incredible humans. And really, you know, when you've got children who start off as nonverbal for quite a few years, you find yourself digging deeper into yourself as a parent to find different ways of connecting, deeper ways of connecting, and allowing yourself to expand beyond the point that you thought you could, to really connect with this precious soul that has been gifted to you. And so that awareness really took me to a whole new level of understanding the dynamics in the relationships and what was being communicated, what was not being communicated on an obvious level, which made me even more intrinsically designed to look beyond behaviors, beyond the obvious. And then I really wanted to share and empower what I'd learned. So I started the Positive Mindset for Kids series. Positive mindset, not positive thinking, 2 separate things as far as I'm concerned. These books that I crafted were a starting point of these meaningful conversations for psychologists, teachers, parents to have with their children. And that naturally sort of evolved into me coaching, primarily children first, and then very quickly worked with the whole family and just elevating all of their brilliance, all of their genius, even greater connection between them to themselves, to each other. So it's been a beautiful journey of self-discovery first, and then just this passion to empower parents and children to be the greatest versions of themselves that they can possibly be. And it's a beautiful privilege.
Okay, well, do you work directly with children then, or directly with the parents, or with families? How does that look like?
Yes. So the way that I work with the parents first, and then we work as a family.
Okay.
I'm just going to.
Yep.
So I found that parents generally show up as the most beautiful versions of themselves, totally dedicated to their children and wanting to take their family to the next level, which starts with, of course, honoring self in that equation, being dedicated to your own healing as a parent, being dedicated to your own growth, looking at everything with curiosity and the ability to see every opportunity as a gift. We put our human labels of positive experience, negative experience. But if we just look at it all as experience with the opportunity of growth, that reframe in itself empowers the whole family. So when we're coming across behaviors that are challenging, which I myself have in my own parenting journey, it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to just sit with it, embrace it, and look for the opportunities of growth, deeper understanding, deeper connection, rather than pushing against, because my kids don't fit inside anybody's box.
No.
And growing up in England, I was raised to fit inside a box. Don't be excessively anything. Just go, nod your head, be good, stay under the radar. Let's fit in with the neighbors. Let's do all of these things. Don't be excessively happy. Don't be excessively sad. That was just the culture of what I grew up in.
Yeah.
And so when I had these kids who were like way outside the box, pushing the envelope on thinking, on social etiquette, on everything that made me so uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
This is like the biggest growth spurt of my life, because everything, all the confines in which I'd been raised, my kids just smashed wide open.
Yeah.
So I had this sort of point in time where I thought, I either fight this or I just surrender to it and see where it takes me. And, my kids have been the most amazingly gorgeous, inspirational life coaches I could have ever have wished for. And really got me, and this is through all of the experiences that we label positive and negative. So there have been times when I'm in my closet crying silently and privately because things have been so challenging, or my kids have been going through such a dark time that I felt helpless as a parent. But just sort of sitting with it, embracing it, and looking for the opportunities to connect, looking for the opportunities to grow. What's the lesson? What's the gift? That's been the most transformational journey of my life.
So I'm hearing the words, connect, growth, like especially connect, curiosity, opportunity. So what does that look like in the day of the life of Cathy with her children? Or a really hard day, and maybe it would help with context. Like, I know this pertains to, any child, not just a child with disabilities or a challenged child with education, let's say. But okay, first of all, you gave birth to, if I'm clear, 5 children with special needs. Is that what you?
Well, we say neurodiversity, and we say special abilities.
Okay.
So I'm not attached at all to the label disorder. So ASD is the word, the D stands for disorder. And I'm very uncomfortable with that word because obviously I'm biased because they're my children, but my children, yes, face certain challenges because of the social contracts and things that they have difficulty in accessing. But they are the most innovative, empathic, wise, gorgeous souls. So I don't see that as a disorder. I see that as a gift to the world. So I wouldn't consider my children having disabilities in that way. They are high functioning, autistic and ADHD. And I just see the way that they think, challenging the status quo, which I don't think is a bad thing now. Before I did, because of my conditioning. Right. But now I look at what the social paradigms that they're breaking down, the level of honesty that they have with the world, that it, at first made me really uncomfortable. But then I developed this healthy respect for them to be able to speak the truth and, not have these social constructs that I had been imprisoned by. They just naturally don't have those. Right. And although we have helped to challenge all of that gorgeousness into a way that they can function really well in society, we've also worked really, really hard to protect those gifts within them, because the tendency of mainstream anything is to squash the bigness of you to fit into what everybody else is comfortable with.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, sorry to interrupt you. I was just going to say, in half the adults out there too, right? It's sort of like, that's the big struggle, is to try to fit into cultural norms and parental, ideations of, what is normal and what is right. But no, like I wanted to get that clarity because, obviously I'm speaking to you from Canada. You're British heritage, but you're living in, is it Australia or New Zealand?
Yes, Australia.
Okay, Australia. So I mean, the terminology from, those three separate continents are all different as well when it comes to, let's say, children that are challenged. Yeah, in terms of living in all these social constructs is maybe the best way of saying it. But no, yeah, I just wanted to get some clarity on that. But absolutely, I think I totally understand what you're saying, and also that you can apply it to every and any child and every family. It's taking away, it's almost like taking away the shoulds. You know how we shouldn't should on ourselves? Like we shouldn't be shooting on our children continuously.
So I agree with you. And I think another point that's really been a gorgeous learning point for me as well has been my journey as this parent to these amazing people. Because what I have found through my experience has been an enormous amount of pressure for my children to fit in. And the interesting twist to that has me been going into schools, for example, and saying to the teacher, how much emphasis is on my child assimilating? And how much emphasis is on the class becoming more inclusive? And it's been a really interesting perspective for me. And one of the most sometimes heartbreaking, but certainly curious positions that I've been in is, for example, my youngest is 3 out of 3. So she's the most, so if you want to say the most autistic, but she's, the one at the highest level that we have. And, I'm so glad she was my 5th because it wasn't my first rodeo and I had some skills and things to draw upon. But, she was very, very challenging from birth. So she was premature. She ripped her feeding tube out. She was just everything. She was fierce from the start. And she was just, we call her a firecracker because she just, I said to my husband, this kid's spirit is way too big for her body. Like she was just everything. She's just too much for so many people, too much. And what I found interesting with her is she was very revealing of other people. So when members of the public would experience her, they'd either say, wow, that kid is just a bubble of joy. She is so alive and joyful and happy and gorgeous and magical. Or they'd say, shut that kid up. So it's so interesting for me to have that experience. And, I have low days. I have vulnerable days. And there were times when my children's expressions of joy were received as disruptive behavior. And then members of the public felt it their right and their duty to inform me of what a terrible parent I was. And, that hurts. It hurts your heart because you see your child as perfect and gorgeous and, perfectly imperfect. I'm not saying they don't have tantrums that need to be worked through. I'm not saying they don't have lessons that they need to learn. Of course they do. They're here having a human experience. But, I have known my children to express joy through sound and be told shut your kid up. You're a terrible mother. How dare you allow your child to be like this? And, most of the time I understand that people are going through their own things, and I try to be really empathetic and patient and loving. And I remember there was one time, and because we've had all of these beautiful children with all of these similar experiences, they wanted to do a genetic study on us to find out if there was a combination between my husband and myself that was creating these wonderful beings. And so I had to take my two the youngest for a blood test. And I was dreading it, because a blood test in the best of times is not great. And then to take these two kids to a blood test, and I contacted the unit and said, hey, my guys have got different needs, and they said, don't worry, we'll get a team down, but it's going to take some time. And I was like, fine. So we were waiting in this environment for 90 minutes. The lights were really harsh. It was really busy. They were doing construction work next door. And my kids were sat so beautifully, and they were playing with the toys. And my youngest at the time, she was still nonverbal, but she was expressing joy through sound. And they weren't being quote unquote naughty. They were just being children, expressing joy in these very difficult conditions. And I thought, these kids are being amazing because of these really challenging situations. And was sat for a long time. And my husband was in intensive care upstairs. So there was lots of things going on. And there were these two ladies sat in the waiting room, and I was feeling really vulnerable that day, very vulnerable as a person, as a mother, as a wife, as a human. And I could feel their eyes boring into me. And I just thought, oh, not today, not today. Please don't do this today. And, I could hear the murmurings, and then the murmurings, they gave each other confidence and permission to then express very loudly in front of the whole waiting room. The noises that you're allowing your children to make are really intrusive, and it's really wrong of you. And I can't believe you sat there and I was just, I don't normally react, but this particular day, I thought, no, not today. And I just looked at them straight in the eye, and I said, thank you for your feedback. These children are autistic. They've been sat here for 60 minutes, waiting beautifully, playing with these toys. The noises that you're hearing are expressions of joy. Their daddy's upstairs in intensive care. And I can assure you that as a parent, I'm showing up in the best way that I can today.
Bravo.
And they looked pretty devastated. I don't think they were expecting a reaction back. And I wasn't aggressive, but I was firm. And I just sat thinking, okay, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And they went off to have their appointment. We're still waiting. And, they came back and they apologized. And I said, well, thank you for that. I really appreciate it. But I said, next time, please, can you look for a reason to be connected and supportive rather than a reason to be offended?
Exactly. Especially woman to woman, mother to mother.
Yeah. And I think, as a mother of children who don't fit inside the box, it can feel very lonely at times. And every parent gets up and thinks, am I showing up the best for my child? Am I being too hard? Am I being too soft? Am I making the right decisions here? I've made mistakes. I don't want to make mistakes. I want to do the right thing for my kid. I want all of these things. And then when you've got children with different abilities, you can times that by 100 because that you already, their behaviors when they show up are being misinterpreted, and you're already being judged without any information, without any understanding, without any empathy or connection. And what it can do is, as a parent, you tend to keep your experience quiet, and you keep any struggle that you might be having very quiet, because you already have the disadvantage of your children being prejudged. So if you share any struggle, you run the risk of them being even more judged and compartmentalized and labeled.
Exactly.
And so, and I'm sure this is relevant to parents who have neurotypical children,
Yeah.
you tend to keep it quiet
Mm-hmm.
because you don't want to be judged as being a faulty parent, because you're already worried. Am I showing up the best for my kids? So you don't want to give anybody else the further opportunity of highlighting any of your fears that are already there.
Well, yeah. And, like you say, for any neurotypical child out there, or parent of a neurotypical child is, I think you suffer in silence because of the guilt. I would think, mother guilt is like you're doing something wrong. You're failing at this, at the most important job you have. Really, I feel like once you give birth to a child, it's sort of like, okay, I'm signing up for guilt for the rest of my life today, because it's something everybody feels like they need to master, but no one gave them the manual. And I think there's so many people struggling because you think you're the only one, the only child that's showing up this way. And then, you're just compounding your failed attempts. So, okay. So back to, like, thank you for that experience, first of all, in the waiting room. That took a tremendous amount of courage, and it shows that speaking your truth and opening up to your vulnerability, it left a meaning to those women. I don't think they're ever going to do it again, be so judgmental like that. And it gave them more of a human experience as well. But okay, so help us out as parents here. So let's say, because we as humans, we do also like step into certain situations with certain assumptions, presumptions. I think whether that's two partners, in a relationship, I'm just presuming, opening this discussion, it's going to either go this way or this way. And rather than using your curiosity, like you mentioned, and trusting in the process, we need to put our presumptions aside. So in terms of walking into a room, let's say you're teenager, I suspect that you have some in the teenage years.
3 in the teenage years, yeah.
3 a year. Okay. So, like there's certain battlegrounds, that you're going to be walking into, especially when it comes to rules in a house. How do you prepare yourself to have those difficult conversations where that you might have to, remind them, or let's say take action with the consequence? It's sort of like you explain things to them. There's rules in the house. If this continues to happen, we need to do this. Then the thing happens. How do you gain the courage and like how do you do that?
Well, certainly in my experience of teaching, coaching, parenting,
Mm-hmm.
if ever I go into a conversation with a client or one of my own children or somebody I've taught, I enter the conversation with the energy of the possibility that I'm wrong.
Nice.
Because our kids are living through a time we didn't live through.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to be open to the possibility that the way we think is right may not be relevant in the reality that they are living through.
I love that.
So I think if we go into each conversation entertaining the possibility that in some part or in the whole part we are wrong, the conversation has a better chance of success. So it's about really listening to the experience of our child. And bearing in mind, each of my 5 children are completely different. So how I show up for one child isn't how the other child needs me to show up. So we have the same values, standards, ethics, all of those things, but the way I show up to nurture and channel those is different for each child in the family where they've been raised pretty much in exactly the same way. So we need to be fluid with our approach. And we really need to reach beyond the behavior that has triggered us. Number one, again, with this curiosity being the core. And really trying to understand on all levels what their experience in these parameters at this time, with these pressures, with this, all of the things that we didn't navigate through, and really try our hardest to connect with where they are, not with our experience of the situation, with their experience of the situation. Because even if that conversation ends in a no being required, or a consequence being administered, our children are more likely to feel seen, heard, understood, validated, and have some sort of ownership within that exchange. And what we're doing at that point is we're instilling in them a sense that what they think, feel, what they believe matters, which is what we want for our kids, right? We want them to grow up thinking what they think, feel, and believe matters. We want them to understand that they deserve to be heard, that their opinion needs to be considered, even if our gut is immediately saying no. Let's just sit with it and let's give it the space and the time and the respect that it needs before we react. I'll give you an example of this. So one of our eldest actually never really fitted into school. She was a good student, but she didn't really fit in with her peers. She was a really deep thinker. She wasn't into any of the typical teenage things. She was into philosophy and all sorts of things. And so she really wasn't interested in going drinking and smoking and things like that. It just wasn't her character. And so she did struggle through school a little bit and really didn't feel like she belonged. And she had frenemies. So these friends who would get together behind her back and post it all over social media, and she'd be crying in my lap night after night because they were being so awful. And then they were being nice to her face. And then they were sending her essays of, you know, really nasty comments in social media. So it's a really difficult time. And what we did during that time was just keep reminding her who she was, keep reminding her to be herself, that you can't sacrifice yourself for these people. They're not worth it. You have to be true to you. You are all of these magnificent things. Those are lies. This is the truth. And we just kept pulling her back to her core throughout that whole thing, because we couldn't fix really what was happening outside. Although we did sort of address those things. But the most important thing was how she was showing up, what she was thinking, how she was feeling, and we just worked on that, right? Because we can't control what's happening outside, we can control what's happening within us. So we did that. And then she was about 15, and this invitation came through to this party, and she was invited, and it was a big deal. And it was a barn in the middle of nowhere, and there was going to be alcohol, and there was going to be 18-year-olds because the siblings were going to be there, and they were all going to be male, and it was going to be this sleepover. And so immediately all of my senses, my spidey senses are going, no, you know, that's not going to happen. I'm really not comfortable with that. But I understood how important this was to her in this moment. My adult perspective was, it's just a party, you'll be fine, you'll live. But understanding her experience of it was really powerful, because this was everything to her in that moment.
Mm-hmm.
So I received it and I said, thank you so much for being honest about the circumstances of this party. I really respect you for sharing that information, possibly knowing that it's going to result in a no. So thank you so much for that honesty. I really respect you and trust you, and I really appreciate the honesty. I'm going to sit with it. I'm going to talk it through with Dad, and I will get back to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I talked it through with my husband, and he was like, why are you asking me? I said, I know, but I want to give it the time and the, respect and all the things. And he said, obviously it's a no. I said, yeah, I realized that. But I said, well, I really wanted to fill you in, because my husband works away. So he's away for 3 weeks. He's only home 1 week. So I have to fill him in a lot of what's happening. And anyway, so I went back to the conversation with her. And I said, number one, I just want to reiterate, I'm so grateful for the relationship that we've got. Thank you so much for your honesty and trust. I really respect you for giving me all of the information, because that's a really mature thing to do. And I know how important this is to you. I know it's a big deal. And I said, I'm so sorry. I cannot support you going. And these are the reasons why.
Mm-hmm.
And she was really upset, but she understood.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that we navigated through that together, I'm not saying she wasn't a little bit salty with me for giving the no, but the way that I delivered the no was loving, connected, empathetic, respectful of her position within the situation. And she didn't go. But interestingly, now that she's an adult, she says to me, Mum, I'm so glad that you steered me in the direction that you did. I'm so glad for the no's. Because she said, I look at where they are now and I look at where I am now, and I wouldn't be where I am now on the path that I'm on had you not steered me in that direction. She said, I didn't always like you for it at the time. But she says, reflecting back, I'm so grateful that you did it. And that's been a really interesting perspective for me, having one that's nearly 20 and my youngest is 5.
Wow.
So that journey of these boundaries, the respect, the integrity, the values, ethics, standards that you thread through everything,
right?
Giving it in the kindest way that you can, but reflecting back on her childhood, going, I'm so grateful that you did that. I'm so grateful that you were strict. I'm so grateful that you put me on this path. So that's been a really gorgeous gift for me. That's sort
wonderful.
Of both ends of the perspective.
Yeah. And okay, so thank you for that example. I think, I just love real life examples because it makes it so much clearer. And I think it might give, some of the parents that are listening some, ideas and in this example where the answer was actually no, but she received it pretty maturely in the moment, because I hear of much other different results, I guess you could say, or where that might go really bad. But it sounds like she was also mature in receiving that information, and because of, like you say, the upbringing that came before that as well. You've been modeling that same sort of parenting from when she was a young child, so she trusted you. I would say. Now, I want, like you mentioned something there, which I want to touch on a little bit. Parenting as a team. You mentioned that your husband is away, 3/4 of the month, and you're on your own. That's a whole other level of parenting. But just how do you remain as a team? Because I think this is really important too.
So my husband and I have been together 28 years. So we've been together a long time, and we've grown separately and together during that time. And for us, certainly that team element comes from absolute respect for each other first, absolute care for each other. And that's important, because the caring it's so interesting hearing our dynamic, because it can be really challenging being the only parent physically present for 3 weeks of the month, because my husband's actually only physically present 12 weeks a year.
Wow.
So that can be really, really tricky, especially when the kids were younger. Now they're getting older, it's a little bit easier. But when they were younger, it was really intense times. But my interpretation was, I wonder how he's going. It must be hard for him to be away. He works so hard. And so my focus was always, how is he in this situation? How can I show up and support him? And his stance is, how is Kath? How is she today? How is she showing, is she looking after herself? How are things going? Is there any way I can support her? And so I feel like, showing up with that, again, connection, empathy, understanding of the other person's experience within the situation has really helped us, because not many couples work really well together and really well apart, and my husband and I really do. And of course, as well, the ability, and this is with your partner or your children, the ability and willingness to have uncomfortable conversations. Yeah. Before they escalate into, the story I'm telling myself is, and therefore I've made it true within myself. So, to say, actually, I need to speak with you when we're both calm and we're both rational and we're both in a loving, heart-centered space, because I don't knee-jerk react. So if something stings me, I just practice the pause. Yeah. Wait for the emotion to settle, wait for my intelligent brain to come forward, and then I will deal with it from that point. And I think that's really important in any relationship. To work through the feeling first, figure out what's that saying, what's that telling me about me and how I'm showing up, and then respond from that empowered place, because the results have already got like 100 times better chance of being successful when you're responding from this intelligent, heart-centered space, instead of knee-jerk reacting and flaring and all of those things. And, I'm not saying we get it right 100% of the time. If I'm feeling tired or I'm feeling stressed, or one of my autoimmune things is flaring and I snap and then he snaps, and, we've been together 28 years. We've had a couple of rows in that time. But generally speaking, the social contract between us is respect, communication, and empathy.
No, that's beautiful. It's wonderful. And again, just, resetting the nervous system, pausing, asking for, I think, guidance, taking that pause. And I like what you're saying about not just reacting, but tapping into your heart and your soul, and even like, okay, I'm thinking this, but what's more important is that I'm feeling this. Go towards your feelings, and what is that feeling telling me about myself? And if it's sort of, I'm hurt, I'm sad, to sit with that and maybe process that a little bit yourself, rather than like I say, reacting because you're sad, maybe communicating that you're sad. Just like you said with your children, it's really no different. Coming, I just hear those words over and over, like, trust your children, have faith in them, be curious about them, be curious about your partner. What's his day like? It's all of the above. But it's definitely an important topic, don't you think? In terms of parenting, you must see that a lot, that the parents need to be, backing each other up, right? Like
100%. But it's also, how are we showing up? And that's the first question that we always should be asking ourselves. And I teach my children to ask themselves
Mhm.
How am I showing up in this situation? And, classically, I work with very high level, high profile families and
Mhm.
beautiful, gorgeous, building bridges and helping communication and
Mhm.
unleashing the brilliance within the individual and the collective. So it's
Mhm.
really a gorgeous position. But initially, the conversation I tend to have with folks is the child saying, fix my parents, and the parent saying, fix my child.
Absolutely.
And then by the end of our time together, everybody turns up and goes, I really didn't show up as powerfully as I could in that situation. I didn't communicate. And these are like 13-year-olds, 10-year-olds, this is amazing stuff. And everybody in the situation comes and says, this is how I didn't show up powerfully enough for you.
Mm-hmm.
This is how I didn't set this situation up for success. And this isn't a blame, shame, guilt, judgy, critical. No, it's absolutely entrenched in love, acceptance, kindness, forgiveness of self, of each other.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, how did I show up? And what we need to be looking at is, how do we deal with conflict? How do we deal with heartache? How do we deal with, and all these people that say that they're loving and they're heart-centered, I want to see how they deal with conflict then. Because throughout our lives, because of our unique combination of experiences, we've experienced a lot of bullying with our kids, our children being the victims of, to the point that they've been hospitalized at times. So this is serious stuff. And about sitting with the emotion and practicing the pause and having the empathy and stuff, it's not just with people that it's easy to love, right? It's with people that are really, really hard to love. And I remember we've had multiple incidents of this, and this is where one of my children's books was born from. It's called Dear Bully, and this was from our personal experiences as a family, because when my kids experienced very serious bullying, my initial reaction was anger, rage, protection, vengeance. How dare anybody do this to my child? And again, it's so important to practice the pause, so important to process through those emotions. And I remember one incident, we hadn't lived in Australia long, so I really didn't have a support network here. Everybody I knew was asleep when I was awake, so it was a really difficult situation. And one of my eldest had been physically assaulted at school. And I remember cooking dinner, the steam in my face. I was crying into cooking the dinner, thinking, what am I going to do? What have I done? We've moved to this place. I don't know anybody. My daughter had been assaulted, physically sort of assaulted by an older boy. And anyway, I didn't have anyone to turn to. It was a real time for me to go internally and look for the answers within myself, which was a real gift, actually, really difficult, but a real gift. And I thought, right, okay, I'm just going to sleep on this. I'm going to sleep on it. And of course, my daughter was really distressed because we'd lived in the leafy suburbs of England, and then we come and this had happened, and we were like completely unprepared, not streetwise. And anyway, so I just slept with it, and I woke up and I thought, okay, I'm a professional person who works with children. Let me just be professional here. And then I thought, what if my child had done this to another child? What would I say to my child, who I love, who I adore, who I would kill for and die for? And so I wrote a letter to the boy as if I was his mother. So it was a letter of discipline in the fact that what you did was actually wrong, and you haven't just hurt one person, you've hurt a whole family, because we love her so much. You've hurt all of us. And would you be brave enough to do this if we were all stood behind her? I don't think that you would be, because this has hurt a whole family. But then I went on to say, you deserve love. You deserve to feel happy. You deserve to feel safe. And so everything I would say to my child to remind them of who they are at their core and all their worthiness and, you know, every gorgeous thing about them, I poured into this letter for this boy. And then I gave it to the principal of the school who was dealing with the conflict, because it would have been very inappropriate for me to chase this child around going, read my letter. It's not how we roll, not very professional. So I gave it to the principal. I said, this is how I process things. I'm a writer. This is how I've worked through it. Do with it what you will. And the principal shared the letter with the family and the child. The child cried. It identified to the school that this child was struggling. It identified to the family that this child was struggling. And it was a real turning point for him. And my child and he never became friends, but he did used to come and check in with her now and again. How are you? Is everything okay? Are you traveling okay today? Blah, blah, blah. So it was, she felt safe. He felt he could use his strength for good. And so it was a real turning point in that dynamic. And that's something that I've done several times over the years. I've written letters to these children as if they were my children. And that's where the book was born from, because, you know, it's that saying, happy people don't hurt people. So if you're trying to share your pain, where's the source? Let's just not deal with the action. Let's look at the source behind the action and heal you from that place, because then the behaviors will dissolve. So as parents, what we're wanting to see amplified in our kids, we have to amplify in ourselves first.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Kill it with kindness is another term that, you know, comes to mind. Very powerful. Again. Well, one other topic I'd like you to speak on quickly, if you have time, is this whole ADHD, you know, which some feel like is a bit of an epidemic for, again, you know, mainly neurotypical children. But what's your views on that? Like, personally, I mean, I think many agree with me, many other professionals, it's not all about medication, perhaps for some, but what's your views? What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's a very personal experience.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a one answer fits all. And I think really parents really need to reconnect with their intuition. Because it's no accident that we got the children that we got. We are the perfect parent for our child. Am I the perfect parent for your child? Probably not. But I am the perfect parent for my children. And so I think this is a very subjective topic. For my daughter, who the eldest has got ADHD and always found school life a challenge, time management a challenge, retaining information a challenge. So things have been hard for her. And she did contemplate taking medication, but the fear for her was that her creativity might be squashed if she took the medication, and she creates whole universes through her art. So, you know, I said, well, I trust you to make the decision that's right for you. You know, maybe if you want to try it. We're not against medication. We're not against anything. It's a very, very personal choice. But for her, and I'm not even going to say for us, because it wasn't my decision, for her, you know, we discussed it. Absolutely. We researched everything. But for her, her creativity, her joy, her spark, her bubble, her everything, we don't want that to be dampened. So what we've done rather has been to put things into place, practical things to help her function at a higher level and reduce that anxiety that often comes with ADHD, and just set her up for the most success she can possibly get, but also for her to embrace who she is, because she's perfect the way she is. She was created this way for a reason. And it's about embracing and enhancing, I feel, and then putting supports in place to further elevate all of that. so that she can show up and be the happiest, most fulfilled, most visionary version of herself that she can be.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, I think that's a perfect answer. I think I totally agree with you. It's very individualistic, and I truly hope that the schools and more teachers are educated to be aware of that as well. And but I think that's the difficulty, right? It's sort of and it sounds like you experienced that in your first years of teaching. It's teachers that are feeling overwhelmed with the classroom, and the number of children in the classroom and their particular individualistic needs. And perhaps that's where the suggestion for medication comes from, as being the first option. But yeah, and so I think maybe what you're saying is that's where the parents need to step in and realize that no one knows their child better than they do, and either and advocate for them.
It's also about stepping up and supporting the teachers. So, for example, with my guys, I know them the best out of anybody in the whole wide world.
Yeah.
At the moment in their stage of development. And so what I did was I showed up to the parent-teacher conference. I showed up to the meeting with bullet points.
Yeah.
This is the best way to support my child in school. And just easy bullet points. I've made resources for the teachers to use with my children. So I've shown up like it's a partnership.
Yeah.
It's really is. And like when I've been working with whichever professional has been working with my kids, I see myself as part of the team. So if we come together and the teachers are supporting the children, the teachers are supporting you, you're supporting the teacher, we're all working together holistically, the outcome's going to be more likely to be positive for everybody involved.
Right.
And I really feel like we all need to step up and really be there for each other and support each other. And for me, being able to unpack for the professionals that have worked with my kids, here's the 17-page report. Here's the 5 things you really need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because teachers are already overwhelmed. They're already showing up and doing so many things for so many different souls and holding so much. We want our children to be held, and we can facilitate that by being as supportive and proactive and communicative and understanding and empathetic with the professionals that are working with our teachers as we can possibly be. And sometimes that means advocating, sometimes, but advocating in a way that can be received. So not from a place of aggression, not from a place of judgment or criticism or anything like that, but just saying, I understand the reasons that you've put those parameters in place, but let me explain to you how they're going to be received is very different to the way that you're giving them. And therefore the outcome isn't going to be what you're wanting it to be. So I suggest, in one case, it was more carrotless stick. Like if we put more, enticing things in front, you're going to get more out of this child rather than consequences, taking away everything he loves, taking away his ability to connect with others. I understand why you're doing that, but it's not going to work. And let me explain why. And let me give you an alternative of how you can have a more peaceful classroom environment when regards to my child.
Yes. And actually you made me think of one other thing, is that sometimes, I know I've been guilty of this, is sort of, speaking with the teacher and maybe expecting like not a great report of them, or because of, you become very, again, sort of siloed in your own like home situation, let's say, where you feel like, oh my gosh, this report's going to be horrible, but they're telling you what a wonderful, respectful, polite young child you have. And you're just like, oh, all right then. But yeah, so it's interesting in both aspects, I think. Yeah.
Again, it's that intention of going into any exchange with the possibility that you're wrong.
Right.
So staying with that curiosity.
Yes. I think that's the most important message, that you gave here, honestly, in one sentence is, I mean, it's all very enlightening and informative, but it's such a simple message for people to go home with. And that is what you just said, to walk into any sort of exchange with the possibility that you might be wrong. I love it. I think the world would work so much smoother if everybody did that. So with that, Cathy, what, just explain to us, you work one-on-one with, let's say, individuals, and you work do you have group programs? Tell us how you show up.
So Parenting Evolution is our website, and you can go in there and you get resources, and there's programs and things. And then there's the opportunity to connect with me one-on-one. I do work with a finite amount of families per year, just because my work is so intimate and so deep and connected. So it's a really privileged position for me to be in. But yeah, so there's the Parenting Evolution is the best place to go and have a look and dig around and see who I am and what I stand for and all of the things. And my biggest mission is to empower each parent to unleash the brilliance within themselves, so that they can light the way for their children to unleash their full brilliance as well. Wonderful.
Okay, so thanks so much again for waking up relatively early for me, and it's just wonderful connecting with you on the other end of the world. Well, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. What a wonderful conversation. I think so as well. Okay, and for the rest, I'll see you next week. Bye-bye. Thanks once again for joining me on another great episode of I Think I Can podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe below so you don't miss out on any future episodes. And until next week, treat each day like it was your last, because each new day is a privilege that we shan't take for granted. Cheers and have a great week. Bye-bye.